Good evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Mzansi Welcomes the World. My name is Faraz Badal. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. 4 days, around about plus minus 96 hours before the start of the G20 Leaders Summit coming to you from Nasrec. Now, when you listen to Minister of International Relations Ronald Lamola giving a press conference yesterday, he was in an upbeat mood. And of course, one wouldn't blame him. Supposed positive showing that South Africa has to give, despite some leaders pulling out of the Leaders Summit. None more so than US President Donald Trump. And it seems quite clearly the rhetoric from Washington is that whatever declaration is made in Pretoria, in Johannesburg, I beg your pardon, may not be carried out by the United States. But be that as it may, how will South Africa's G20 presidency be defined? Joining us now to take this conversation forward, I'd like to welcome, no stranger to us here on Hilaal TV, it's none other than Sandile Swana, political and governance analyst. Mr. Swana, always good having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for us. And again, let me greet your viewers.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. In the view of Mr. Swana, how would you define South Africa's G20 presidency for this year?
I would give them very good points. I think that, the G20 was founded on the basis of financial crisis, actual financial crisis, and it has worked through at least a minimum of two of those major crises. However, this time, the crisis was geopolitical, centered around the tariff wars that Donald J. Trump of the United States has launched, centered, obviously there were other surrounding issues and the wars that were going on. So within that, South Africa has done, I think, relatively well. I think they've got the in as much as they've completely lost the friendship of the United States, they've gained new friends such as the EU, which is our number one. The EU as a whole is our number one trading partner historically in any event. So there are positives, and I think even with the boycott by the United States of America, you still have the support of BRICS, EU, and the AU. African Union.
Mr. Swana, what's interesting about this is that South Africa have really, and one needs to give them credit, they've played this diplomatic game quite well. At the start of this year, we saw what happened with the M23 rebels in the current war that is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Then you had Volodymyr Zelensky coming to South Africa, and President Ramaphosa and South Africa were termed as this honest broker. South Africa has maintained its case in the ICJ against Israel for the genocide that is happening in Gaza. And even though we've seen these tariff wars that are happening and this false narrative of a white genocide that is happening in South Africa's played this diplomatic game quite well. And I think, to their credit, they have to be praised for that.
Yes, I think you and I are on the same page. When somebody has done something successful, it's easy to think that it was easy. There was nothing easy about this, and it demanded not only intelligence and wisdom, but extreme courage. Because in these types of disagreements with the U.S., we've seen people like Muammar Gaddafi getting killed. We've seen people like Saddam Hussein getting killed. So when the USA threatens you and starts spreading lies about you, your safety is in serious question. So you do need to be very, very courageous to continue on that path. On the diplomatic side, we must give them credit, but we must also be aware that there are some weaknesses. For instance, our military orchestration in the DRC was not up to standard. And there are other things where we could have been very strong, but prior errors have actually held us back. But the potential and capability remains in place. We're still there. We can still play a very strong game.
Mr. Swana, from an economics perspective, this is going to be a true test because on one side, there seems to be this push for huge economic equality within the global south. But of course, South Africa will be the final country for quite some time to hold the G20 presidency after this long run of global south nations that have held it. The big concern is that the United States of America is really not going to adopt anything. As we speak right now at the COP30 summit, there really seems to be huge disagreements with regards to the way the climate crisis needs to be dealt with. How does South Africa stamp its authority, number one, and number two, leave this legacy of really trying to find this economic equality that is trying to be pushed at the summit this year?
It's actually quite interesting as you raise this question. I think I remember one scholar, I think her name is Camilota Perez from Latin America. When we're discussing these issues were being discussed about this green economy and the economy of the future, she actually said that it will not help all of us to think that the USA will lead us in that direction. The leadership will not come from the US. The leadership will come from Europe. It will come from the global south. Obviously, when you read these things, say, 10 years ago and so on, you know, there is just information. But actually, that is where we are. So whether the USA adopts anything or doesn't adopt anything, people must run their countries, run their continents in the way that actually profits present and future generations, and also the externalities, in other words, the spillover costs, because there are people such as the US, the average US citizen, what they consume in energy and other things per year, you'll probably discover that 70% of that cost is borne by the people of the third world, the people of the global south. So when we're talking about equality, we're also talking about that you cannot, for instance, have a meal, and that meal is a meal that is supposed to be had by 5 people, and you are just increasing your obesity, and so on and so forth. So to me, those are discussions, and the people of the global south have got to understand that this is their discussion, this is their project, this is their process. Whether the US agrees or not, we have to press ahead and we have to trust ourselves to go ahead.
You know, you mentioned the European Union at the start, Mr. Swana, and it's quite interesting that when, of course, Donald Trump had cut certain funding through PEPFAR for South Africa, it was the European Union that said, no, we're going to maintain this relationship with South Africa. The global north is kind of at a crossroads, isn't it? Because as much as we see this rhetoric coming from Donald Trump, the European Union is playing a very cautious game, a game where they're looking at the global south and saying, it's very difficult for us not to cut relations with China and many nations within the African continent.
I mean, you know, let's talk, for instance, a nation like Canada, right? How do you then define Western civilization? When your neighbor comes to you and tells you that actually, you know, I've decided to take over your country to be one of the states or provinces in my own country, right? Now, things like that were happening 100 years ago and before. We thought we were past that stage where somebody can just walk over there and take somebody else's country and the matter ends there. You go to Greenland and you say, I want to take over this country. And then you say, those who want to be in alliance with me, in essence, must pay a protection fee. I'm talking about the US. So the whole concept of what constitutes Western civilization outside of dictatorship, outside of bullying or colonialism, a new form of very rude and uncovered, uncouth colonialism, where you can just go and take somebody. You look at how they went into Panama. So the Europeans have got to get out of the fantasy of that they are actual equal allies with the United States. They are probably now, as we speak today, just vassals. They have a better chance of making it by partnering with Russia, partnering with China. But because of the airs of Western white supremacy, they still would have preferred that China and Russia are subordinates. And that time is over. That time is over. It's not going to happen. So they've got to come into the relationship as the European Union this time of equality. It's not even about how big your army is or how big your wallet is. It's about understanding that we have no problem as the people of the global south with our languages. We have no problem with our culture, our lifestyles. We just want to do business with you on fair and equal terms.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Sandile Swana, and we are going to be touching on one of those countries within Western civilization, the United States of America. Well, its senior leadership is not coming, but what does that mean in terms of the baton being handed over from Pretoria to Washington for that G20 presidency? Mzansi welcomes the world, returns after this break. Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. I'm having a conversation with Sandile Swana, political and governance analyst. Mr. Swana, just you and I have had discussions with regards to the United States of America alone this year on numerous occasions. And I think our last conversation was when obviously this bill was being brought up by Senate, or the proposed bill to, of course, sanction certain ANC leaders. But this, of course, did not start back in August or July. This was, of course, something that had stretched from the start of the year when, of course, you had AfriForum going to Washington, D.C., and this false narrative that had been created of this white genocide. And then Trump's proposed handpick for the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, Brent Boswell III, had reiterated this claim of this white genocide. It was quite clear, wasn't it, that from then, the relationship between Washington and Pretoria was going to be this strained. And here we are right now with regards to this.
Yes. I think that all of us, we are learning what Western civilization is. At the height, at the apex of the Western civilization is the United States, the captain of the whole ship of Western civilization. It's a civilization that Professor Cornel West believes is based on mendacity and duplicity, where lies are the stock in trade. Now, imagine Donald Trump and J.D. Vance came here, and then we asked them, can you go and show us these graves that you were, the mass graves where we buried these white people? Can you now take us to the specific location that your intelligence told you is there? And all these other things, of which there is no evidence. But we know that they started the war in Iraq on false information, which was later admitted by Tony Blair and others that they were lying. There was no need for that war. And there are many other wars that have been started, and including the war, by the way, in Palestine, started on pure lies. So I would dare say that as a citizen, that from a citizen's point of view, Trump has got a problem. He cannot take the risk of coming to South Africa and being asked to point out these things that he says are happening. Imagine if you are not a Boer. So the people who are killing the Boers are the ones who are not Boers. So when I finish work here, on my way home, I go past somewhere and kill 4 Boers, get a cold beer, have my dinner, take a shower, and then go to sleep. That's what black people do in South Africa. because there's a genocide going on. So it's an insult to the citizens, especially those who are of non-European origin in South Africa, that were actually actively engaged on a daily basis in the slaughter of the local white population here in South Africa. It's an insult. It's highly provocative. However, these are shameless lies that continue to be articulated with serious international criminal intent. And nobody in South Africa should think that we are exempt from war crimes conducted against us by the US. And the things that they mention, what are they going to do? Think that they are mentioning these things in order to do nothing? No, I don't think so. There is something that they want to do. And we need to figure that out and be ready for it.
And here's the thing, Mr. Swana, is the G20 would have offered an opportunity. If Donald Trump had acted like a statesman, here would have been the chance for him to say, we apologize for this falsification that we had mentioned of a white genocide. He would have come here a few days ago, visited the white farmers, visited the black workers in the white farmers who, let's not forget, some of them live in very, very difficult conditions in these farms. And this narrative would have been put to bed, and him and President Ramaphosa would have found common ground. But no, there seems to be, and I think we should call it for what it is, a sense of arrogance that is coming from Washington to continue to peddle these lies and not to find some sort of common ground to say, we're taking over this G20 presidency, let's go to South Africa and have diplomatic relations. It's not going to happen, and it's quite clear right here.
No, that one is not going to happen. By the way, the conflict between the United States and South Africa has got nothing to do with any white farmers that are being killed. All of us know there are no white farmers.
Of course, definitely.
So the issue is the plans of the United States on two fronts. The one front being, what does the United States want to do in Palestine and the surrounding territories? The long-term policy of the United States is that the state of Israel is their entry point to dominate the oil-rich countries of what they call the Middle East, in Western Asia and so on. So that's the one agenda. The second agenda is cultural domination. The nations that go along with the United States, for the most part, you'll remember that these are nations who have participated in colonialism and in genocide, some even in slavery. You'll bear in mind that the US was founded on two birth defects. The first birth defect is the genocide against the native Indians. They have not yet told us when they are going to have the first native Indian president in the United States or Secretary of State who's a native Indian in America. They've not yet told us about that. The second birth defect of the state of the United States is the slavery of Africans, more especially. So it's a nation, and it shares common characteristics with Australia, with the state of Israel, with South Africa. So these people are not different from J.G. Stradom, D.F. Malan, Hendrik Verwoerd, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher. So it is a program driven by Donald J. Trump to establish white supremacy or the Baskap or the Herren folk over those nations that are not determined by them to be superior to others, to be superior. They identify certain people, such as the Australians and others who go along with them, to be the people who must be classified as superior, who have the right to conduct genocide, who have the right to colonize others, and to economically exploit others.
Mr. Swana, one final question. Western civilization, is this where it gets the shake-up? Is this where it learns that in order to share the world, the Global South has to have a part in it? Is this G20 Leaders Summit or the 4 successive G20 Leaders Summits that we've had within the Global South going to be that lesson?
We are there, and you remind me as you speak of Julius Nyerere of
Yes.
Tanzania, when he warned these Europeans that you are not going to be able to live in Africa if your terms of staying in Africa is that everybody must stay here on your terms. So the United States and its allies cannot live on the planet Earth only on the condition that all of us live on the planet on the terms that are dictated to us by the United States. I think the people of China, the people of Russia, people of Brazil have done a great job to assert that cultural freedom, to assert the freedom of our languages, our religions. And the United States knows that these people from the global south can rise to a very high standard and are no longer beggars at all.
Mr. Swana, always good having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on Mzansi Welcomes the World.
Thank you so much for this.
That's Sandile Swana, political and governance analyst, of course, just breaking down South Africa's legacy of the G20 presidency, but also what happens. And there's something interesting that he mentions, that the coexistence now has to happen. And the global north needs to understand this coexistence, that if you're going to have an economy, if you're going to have a world that is on equal terms, the global south has to be part of it. And that, in many ways, is non-negotiable. After the break, we are going to be having a recap of Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola's press briefing that he had yesterday. And within that press briefing, he speaks on South Africa's readiness for the G20 Leaders Summit. Of course, he touches on some of the nations that are not going to be prepared, but South Africa says they are fully ready for this coming weekend at Nasrec. And that's all we're going to have for you on Mzansi Welcomes the World. For the next 2 days, I'll be bringing you content from the B20 Summit. From myself, Ross Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.